Time flies. We are already doing the second season of the podcast series on inclusive research and innovation in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In short, IRI and STEM. Let us start with a wrap-up of Season 1. A very heartfelt welcome to you as our listeners. My name is Claudia Werker, and I'm the chairperson of the IRI in STEM initiative at Delft University of Technology. Today, I will look back and ahead with TianQing Yen.
Hi everyone, I supported the first season of this podcast series as a research assistant at Delft University of Technology. With Claudia, I will reflect on the conversations from the season and what we found surprising, insightful, or otherwise memorable.
We covered a lot of topics in the first season. Human-robot interactions, automobile safety, healthcare innovations, and medical research, and more. Was there a particular episode that stood out to you?
I think my favorite episode was Inclusive Mobility Systems for Everyone with Mara Tonelli. I found it particularly inspiring when she described bridging her technical background in control systems with her interests in diversity and inclusion. You asked quite a few of your guests how they ended up pursuing inclusive research and innovation, and I specifically remember that Dr. Tonelli discussed the need for political will to carry out inclusive research. I agree with her that political will is really important to doing inclusive research, because so often IRI requires that we challenge existing systems, standards, and practices in research and innovation.
Yes, Mara is great in drawing the big picture. She's both a researcher bridging engineering with insights from social sciences and humanities, and at Politecnico Milano, her rector's envoy for diversity and inclusion.
Not only is she integrating the technical and social sides of her research, Dr. Tonelli is also engaging with the public and policy through her work.
I think that both have to happen in parallel. The actual IRI and STEM research and policy measures complementing or stimulating it. I mean, in our first episode, this great team from Graz University of Technology were sharing how they are tackling the problem with the crash test dummies, mainly mirroring the average man, whatever that is. And at the beginning of this year, the European Commission published a study on the inclusiveness of anthropometrics in European harmonized standards. They are working now hard on implementing more inclusive standards, and when they do, diverse crash test dummies will not only be a nice-to-have thing, but something the car industry has to put money behind. This will increase the safety of women, but also men who are much taller, shorter, thicker, or thinner than the average man considerably. Spoiler alert, I'm planning to interview the European civil servant responsible for this initiative in our second season.
That's certainly a move in the right direction. So which episode did you find particularly inspiring?
Well, every episode contributed to my understanding of IRI and STEM, though in different ways. Standing out for me is the story that Irene Grossmann told in the episode on inclusive medical research, because she told it to me several years ago. As a PhD student, she not only dared to think about medical research very differently, she dared to act on it too. At the time, her story made what I wanted to do with my journey to develop the IRI and STEM initiative much more tangible. In the episode, Irene tells how she went to a conference in Germany and challenged the surgeons there to look more closely at their data and reporting of surgery outcomes, because the complication rates might be much higher than they think. She explained that even though no one commented on her talk, afterwards in the hallways they agreed with her, but said that they were too scared to say it themselves.
That's a great example of the strong initiative or political will necessary to do this work. I think you need a bit of grit to stick to what you believe in and to continue pushing, even when other people might say, "Oh, this is not how we do it here," or "I don't think this is relevant or important." Of course, it would also help if the legal requirements regarding testing, diagnosis, treatment, all of that in the healthcare sector would follow suit. Which interviewee, in your view, Claudia, has already done the most with IRI and STEM?
While all our interview partners carry out research and innovation with IRI and STEM elements, that would have to be Odette Scharenburg. She's working on inclusive voice recognition, and she uses the voices of normal speakers as the control group to develop voice recognition solutions for all speakers, that diverge from the normal speakers, that is, children's voices, the voices of people with a speech impairment or with a dialect.
For her work, Odette needs good quality disaggregated data. This is one of her major challenges of involving diverse speakers in her research. She needs it to improve automatic speech recognition systems. This also came up in the episode on inclusive algorithms with Claudia Wagner. She explained a lot of quantitative research in computational social science is either based on simulated data or existing data sets that don't necessarily include those populations who are most at risk for discrimination or bias in online spaces. Why do you think data is such a big challenge when doing inclusive research?
Data seems to be a challenge for most of our interview partners because the more diverse the data is you have to collect and analyze, the more complex your research becomes. Moreover, it has a lot to do with how we include certain groups in both STEM and society as a whole. It matters how diverse the people doing research are, too. STEM research in particular is still dominated by white, able-bodied men. However, if the people who are doing research on, say, automotive safety or on speech recognition are more diverse, then they will be more inclined to also involve the people for whom these systems are not designed.
There is also a lot of distrust of science, especially from populations that have been taken advantage of by researchers in the past. For example, many Black and African American people distrust the medical system in the US. The Tuskegee experiment is a blatant example of this population being exploited in the past. Black men were refused syphilis treatment without their consent for the sake of learning about how the disease develops. But even today, there's a lot of examples of medical neglect or discrimination in healthcare, such as Black women not being taken as seriously when they express symptoms or pain. So there may be hesitation from certain populations to become involved in research projects because of this understandable distrust of researchers.
Convincing them to become involved and to share data can be tricky. And it is even much broader than groups having explicit negative experiences. Mara Tanelli shared an example of this from her research on mobility systems. She explained that it can be hard to convince the public to share information about their socioeconomic identity or individual characteristics, because they don't always see how this is relevant to the research, and it is a very personal thing to share as well.
You actually asked Claudia Wagner how she might involve these people who are most discriminated against in online spaces in her research. I remember she shared that it would be super valuable to have an experimental platform to involve these populations that are at high risk for discrimination online in participatory ways. So having structural support or ways to reach diverse participants is definitely a start.
On a broader scale, but also very concretely involving more diverse participants in research, requires addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the structure and culture of research institutions like ours. The last decades have passed with claims that quotas would be unnecessary. The hope was that a more inclusive culture would be followed by more women in STEM fields. Yet culture and structures co-evolve. We know from many studies in social sciences that only if you have 1/3 of people not belonging to the dominant group, a culture becomes inclusive. Having 1/3 women in all parts of the organization, particularly where decisions are being made, would not only serve women but also other minorities that are underrepresented in our employee and student population.
In the last episode of the season, you interviewed one of your colleagues, David Abing. He finished with a comment that reflection is an essential part of responsible and inclusive research and innovation. You said something similar as well in the Meet the Host episode. But although reflection was emphasized in my own education at TU Delft, I also hear from students that it is hard to know what to reflect on or how to start reflecting. Do you have any tangible examples of how you reflect in your own research process?
Well, one of my colleagues is now working with inspiration cards in her teaching. Students are asked to think about the impact of their projects for different kinds of people. This is, in my opinion, a great starting point to bring IRI and STEM to education in a very tangible manner. Looking forward to this upcoming season, what would you be interested in hearing more of?
I think for this season, I would be interested in hearing more stories from university professors who work closely with industry professionals, like Domenico Della Volpe, from the episode Inclusive Design for Medical Devices and Surgery. I appreciate how tangible his work is, and it was really clear to see how inclusive research and innovation was taking action in his research process. I'm also excited to hear from this civil servant from the European Commission who is pushing for inclusive product standards.
I was also thinking of interviewing our data stewards on how to deal with sensitive information on, for example, sexual orientation needed for some IRI in STEM projects. That would be interesting to those who want to do IRI and STEM research themselves in very practical terms.
The question you asked me is also a great question for our listeners. Who do you think we should talk to in season 2? What questions would you like us to ask? Let us know your thoughts and comments. You can reach us through Messenger on Instagram at IRI_in_STEM or by email irianstem@gmail.com. Thanks so much for joining us for season 1.
And looking forward to welcoming you to our season 2 on IRI and STEM.